Hey everybody, it's the end of the year, and in the spirit of endings, I'm going to be making a list of 10 of the worst military decisions of all time. At the Battle of Chancellorsville, General Joseph Hooker of the Union took the low ground instead of the high ground. This enabled Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson to surround the Union troops and destroy them in what was one of the Confederacy's greatest victories. The only plus side for the Union was that Stonewall Jackson died during the battle. In the 12th century, when the armies of Guy de Lusignan, the king of Jerusalem, learned that the Muslim forces under Saladin had attacked a city nearby, they went to investigate. However, Guy's route took them over an arid plain, and they did not have enough water supplies, so, needless to say, when Saladin's fighting force sprung their trap, the Christians didn't fare very well. This is more of a planning error than a military error per se, but I'm still including it on the list. After World War I, the French fortified their borders with Germany and Italy to prevent another attack. They did not, however, fortify their border with Belgium, and the Nazis used this to great effect during the Second World War. The main flaw behind the Bay of Pigs invasion, which sent U.S. troops to Cuba in an attempt to remove Fidel Castro's regime from power, wasn't the plan itself. It was the fact that only 1,400 men were sent in an attempt to defeat the entire Cuban military. Vietnam is in this list because it's basically the United States government threw too much money and too many men at a lost cause. Quite obviously, the North Vietnamese were never going to give up unless we nuked them, and then that would have been World War III, and we wouldn't be here today. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan is on this list because the Soviets did the exact same thing 4 years after the US got out of Vietnam, but expected it to go differently because it was Afghanistan. During the Battle of Gettysburg, Robert E. Lee ordered the Pickett-Pettigrew Assault, which became known as Pickett's Charge, in which he sent a huge portion of his force at the Union center. Although they managed to pierce through momentarily, they were eventually repulsed, with massive casualties. And this marked the beginning of the end for the Confederacy. Long story short, Napoleon invaded Russia. He did not provide his troops adequate supplies to invade Russia, least of all in the middle of the Russian winter. This was the end for Napoleon. You can say Waterloo all you want, but this was the end for Napoleon. He lost hundreds of thousands of men, and those losses would come back to bite him. To fund their war in China, the Japanese needed to get to the oil-rich islands of the South Pacific. To get to the South Pacific, they had to get through the Philippines. The problem was, the Philippines were an American colony, and America was not very happy about Japan's war in China. Instead of invading the Philippines, which would not have really provoked a major American response, the Japanese High Command decided to attack the American fleet at Pearl Harbor. Though this was probably the better move from a purely military standpoint, it did not account the rage of the American people which followed the attack. And that rage eventually contributed to the fall of not just Japan, but the whole of the Axis. During the Battle of Little Big Horn, General George Custer refused to listen to orders to wait. He also refused reinforcements. He also refused to have Gatling guns, predecessors to the modern machine gun, brought with him. Needless to say, Little Bighorn was one of the most embarrassing losses in American military history. Stalingrad. So, Hitler has his army around Moscow. Now, the logical move would be destroy Moscow, its capital of the Soviet Union. Instead, Hitler decides, hey, Stalingrad, named after Stalin. I'll get that instead of the capital of the Soviet Union. That way, instead of disheartening the whole of the Soviet people, I'll dishearten Stalin, and then he'll obviously surrender. First off, way to reach Stalin, genius. Second of all, we all know how it ended. Red Army crushes German Army, forces them to retreat. Retreat is unstoppable. And that is how Hitler lost World War II. The end.